My name is Whitney, and I'm 36. At a New Year's Day brunch in Philadelphia, the room was loud in that polite, performative way families get when they want everything to look normal. I was halfway through my plate when a small shadow slid beside my chair, steady and deliberate, like this had been practiced. A child's hand tipped a half-eaten plate, and warm leftovers collapsed onto my food, right in the center, like I was a bin someone forgot to take out. Then she looked at me and said, "Mom says you're family trash." I didn't react. I didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't even look around to see who was watching, because I already knew they were. I just stared at the mess on my plate and felt something inside me go quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't come with tears. It comes with a decision. That night, after everyone went home and the group chat went still for a while, my phone lit up with a message from Mom. "You're out of our lives." Two people reacted to it immediately, quick and casual, like pressing a button was easier than looking me in the eye. I smiled at my screen and typed one line. "Fine. Everything in my name disappears tomorrow." Then I left the group. By midnight, the messages wouldn't stop, panicked and fragmented, like someone had pulled a plug and they were only just hearing the silence. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. Back in my apartment that night, the silence felt heavier than the walls. I set my phone face down on the counter and left it there, buzzing against the laminate like it belonged to somebody else. Habit made me flip on the kitchen light, start the kettle, move through the same small motions I'd been repeating for years. The only real difference was in my chest. Something that used to bend automatically around other people's crises had finally gone stiff. My name is Whitney Caldwell. I am 36 years old, and if you looked at my life on paper, you would say I am doing fine. I have a steady job in operations for a logistics company in South Philadelphia, a one-bedroom walk-up that I pay for on time, no kids, no pets, no partner to negotiate with. My credit score is the kind of number banks smile at. None of that is why my family needs me. They need my name. My younger sister Desiree is 3 years behind me and has been the center of the Caldwell universe since she could talk. My parents, Maureen and Philip, built their days around whatever she wanted even when we were children. Back then, it was dance lessons and new sneakers. Now it is a crossover she cannot afford, an image she cannot maintain, and a daughter of her own, Alana, who has been taught that the adults who pay for her life do not include me. For more than a decade, every time somebody in my family fell behind, the solution quietly routed through me. When my parents were months away from losing their row house to back taxes and a second mortgage they did not understand, I took out a personal loan large enough to clear the worst of it. The monthly payment still leaves my account on the same day every month, a four-figure sum drafted before I even see my paycheck. When Desiree wanted a newer car for Alana's safety, the dealership would not qualify her alone, so I signed as the primary on the lease. The payment withdraws from my account automatically. The registration, the higher insurance rate, and the tolls from her weekend trips to the shore all hit cards in my name. When Maureen's part-time job stopped offering benefits, I added her to the health plan at my company. The premium comes out of my paycheck, and the copays go on my card. When Philip's blood pressure prescription went up in price, I told the pharmacy to keep his card on file under mine so he would not stress about it. Even Alana's after-school program, the coding club Desiree brags about to her friends, is billed directly to me. The monthly fee looks small if you stare at it alone. It does not look small when you stack it next to the phone family plan, the internet that runs through my name, and the subscriptions everyone logs into from their living rooms while I eat leftovers over the sink. None of this was ever framed as a request. At first, it sounded like flattery. "You're so organized, Whit. You're good with money. We'd be lost without you." Those sentences were the wrapping paper. Inside them was the same assumption every time. I would fix it because that is what I do. Over time, there stopped being conversations at all. Bills simply migrated toward me. Notices got forwarded, logins changed hands, and somehow I ended up as the person whose name appeared on everything important while being treated like a guest at every family event. Desiree's emergencies were treated like natural disasters. My overtime and second jobs were treated like weather. I told myself this was what grown daughters did. You step in when your parents stumble. You carry your sister through rough patches until she catches up. You do not itemize every sacrifice or ask for applause. You just keep going, because the alternative feels like betrayal. Standing in my tiny kitchen with the kettle hissing and my phone vibrating on the counter, I realized I could list every amount I was paying for them, but could not remember the last time any of them asked what it was costing me. I know every due date and password linked to their comfort by heart. I can picture the color of each company's logo when I close my eyes, the way a nurse learns medication labels. What I do not have is a single clean sheet where any of it lives together. I have always avoided that, telling myself that love does not belong in a spreadsheet, that family is not supposed to feel like an account you reconcile. That night, for the first time, the absence of that sheet felt less like virtue and more like denial. When the kettle clicked off, I finally picked up my phone. The screen was crowded with notifications, stacked icons fighting for attention. The group chat sat near the top, frozen on my last message. I ignored it and opened my banking app instead. The loading wheel spun once, then my accounts appeared. Neat and indifferent. Numbers that had always felt distant now looked like something I could take back. I went straight to the section for recurring payments. The list was longer than I like to admit. My own rent and utilities sat at the top. Then came the others. A line for a loan tied to my parents' row house, marked with their address but my name. A lease payment for a crossover registered to my sister. A charge for a health insurance plan with 3 dependents. A recurring fee for an after-school program labeled with Alana's name. A family phone plan with multiple lines. Home internet at an address that was not mine. Streaming accounts and other subscriptions, all linked to my cards. For years I had scrolled past this page without really seeing it. That night it looked different. Every line was a story about who had been allowed to relax and who had not. Every deduction carried a history of calls, tears, excuses, and that tight, forced gratitude that never turned into actual thanks. I opened a new note and listed each obligation with the person who benefited beside it. The loan for the house, my parents. The car lease, my sister. The health plan, my parents again. The coding club, my niece. The phone lines, almost everyone but me. I wrote the amounts in full words instead of digits, forcing myself to feel the weight of them. 4 figures here, 3 figures there, strings of 2 figures that did not look like much until they stacked into something enormous. Once everything sat in one place, there was nothing left to argue with. This was not a handful of favors. This was a parallel life I had been paying for, while keeping my own deliberately small. I started with the things that touched only them. The crossover payment could be shifted off my shoulders. The company that held the lease offered chat support. I asked how to stop being the primary payer and how to route bills to the person actually driving the car. They were polite but firm. They could not rewrite the contract. What they could do was stop pulling from my account and send each invoice directly to the address on file. I confirmed the change and watched the status update. The next draft would not come from my account. Next came the extra lines on my phone plan. In the account settings, each device had a label. Mom, Dad, Des, Elena's tablet. Mine was the only one I actually needed. I checked the contract dates and weighed the penalty for shrinking the plan against another year of paying for 4 lines. The fee for cutting them loose was smaller than the cost of continuing. I scheduled the change for the next billing cycle. Their phones would not shut off overnight, but the notice would go out. They would have time to move their numbers and learn what service cost when nobody else was cushioning the bill. For the house loan payment, I left the underlying agreement alone and stopped only the automatic draft. The bank would send a notice when the transfer did not arrive. My parents would have to speak to the lender themselves instead of letting my balance absorb their silence. The after-school program was simple. There was a portal with a switch for automatic billing. I turned it off. The site warned that future charges would need to be paid manually to keep enrollment active. A red banner appeared across the top of the page and stayed there even after I logged out. Health insurance would take more care. I could not drop my parents in the middle of a coverage period without giving them a chance to adjust. In my company portal, I read the rules for changing dependents. There were windows for updates, penalties for mid-year removals, options for them to continue coverage on their own. I saved the relevant pages and decided that piece would not move tonight. By the time I closed the note, I had a map of every connection between my accounts and my relatives' comfort. Some changes were already moving. Others waited for a call or a form. All of them were visible in a way they had never been before. My phone was still buzzing with messages I refused to open. I set it on the table again with the sound off and shut the laptop. The apartment was the same size it had always been, but my life no longer felt completely occupied. A little before midnight, the quiet in my apartment shifted. My phone kept lighting up on the table in short pulses. I let it flash a few times before I turned it over. Notification banners stacked on the lock screen, most of them new threads where the group chat used to be. Above them sat 2 alerts from my bank, both marked as important. I opened the bank messages first. The system had blocked a scheduled draft tied to the house loan after I removed the authorization earlier that evening. Another notice said a recurring charge for the car lease could not be processed and would need a new funding source. The language was flat, but the timing meant those alerts were landing in more than one inbox, not just mine. When I backed out to the home screen, the text threads came into focus. One from Desiree, one from Maureen, one from Philip, and one from an unknown number. I opened my sister's first. Her messages stacked one after another. At first, she wanted to know what was happening with the car payment and why her bank app showed the automatic draft as unavailable. Then the tone shifted into accusation, insisting that I fix it now because I had signed for the lease, and because, as she wrote, my name was on everything. Every line carried the same assumption it always had. My job was to absorb consequences. I closed her thread without answering and tapped on Maureen's. Mom's messages were longer. She had forwarded the blocked house payment and added a paragraph about how close they were to losing the place last time. She called the row house our home and the only thing we had left, as if I had not been the one propping it up for years. Her final line said she knew I was upset, but reminded me that family does not walk away over one rude comment from a child. The unknown number turned out to be Philip. He had sent fewer texts, but each one felt heavier. He told me I was being dramatic, that responsible adults did not play games with mortgages and coverage. He called the decision reckless. He never called it mine. I read each message once, then put the phone down and filled a glass with water. For the first time, I did not feel the urge to reply. Not to explain, not to defend myself, not to offer a compromise that would keep everyone else comfortable and leave me scrambling later. I felt the urge to make sure every step I had taken would hold up if anyone tried to challenge it. Roderick was the only person in my life who knew the outline of my finances. We had met when I started at the logistics company, when I was still paying off student debt and picking up extra shifts. He worked as a senior analyst in another department and did part-time consulting, helping people untangle money they had tied into knots. After listening to me describe another round of temporary help for my family, he had once asked me to bring everything in one folder. It was the closest anyone had ever come to telling me I was allowed to set limits. I scrolled past the family threads and opened our last conversation. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long minute before I typed out a question. I told him in broad strokes what I had done that evening and asked whether those changes were enough to pull my name out of places it never should have been, and what I still needed to do to protect myself. I did not expect an answer until morning. The reply arrived a few minutes later. He wrote that he could not give formal legal advice over text, but from what I described, stopping the drafts was the only way to push the other adults to take responsibility. He suggested I call my bank during business hours to put formal stop payments on anything still scheduled from my accounts, and to request written confirmation. He told me to download every statement showing the history of who had been paid and from where, and to save copies somewhere my family had never touched. At the end, he wrote one sentence that landed harder than any threat coming out of my family's phones. If anyone wanted to accuse me of abandonment, the paper trail would show a decade of the opposite. I read that line again before locking my screen. The texts from across the city kept coming, piling up in unseen threads. I left the phone face down on the table and sat by the window. Outside, the night between one year and the next finally felt quiet enough for me to hear myself think. By late morning the next day, I chose a place where I could leave without anyone blocking the door. There was a narrow diner on the edge of Center City, chipped counters and bottomless coffee, the kind of room where people mostly minded their own business. I took a booth along the wall facing the entrance and wrapped my hands around a mug until the heat steadied them. Maureen walked in first, eyes sweeping the room like she expected bad news to be printed above my head. Philip followed with his jaw set and his coat half open. Desiree came last, still scrolling her phone. Alana pulled along at her side. They spotted me and moved together toward the booth, a unit so practiced it hurt to watch. They slid into place. Maureen and Philip sat opposite me, Desiree beside me, Alana at the outside edge where she could see every face. For a moment, we let the clatter of plates and the hiss from the grill do the talking. Philip spoke first. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice low but sharp. He said it was time to stop whatever game I thought I was playing. Mortgages were not leverage. Auto drafts were not weapons. The house payment had bounced. The lease company was already sending warnings, and grown adults did not pull stunts that put roofs and contracts at risk. He called what I had done reckless. Maureen's fingers twisted the laminated menu. She told me she had not slept, that losing the row house made her sick, that she did not recognize the version of me who could cut off her own parents over hurt feelings. She framed it as a moment of anger, not the end of a long pattern. Desiree did not bother with restraint. She went straight for the car. She reminded me that the lease was in my name, that my signature sat on every page, that if payments stopped, collections would come for me first. She said she needed that vehicle for Alana, that she would not be seen dragging her child around in something old and unreliable. The message under every sentence was the same. My job was to absorb the damage. I let them talk. I counted my breaths, let each accusation land and slide away. When they finally paused, waiting for me to apologize or back down, I reached into my bag and set a thin folder on the table. I opened it toward them. The first sheet showed the loan history for their house, a stack of transfers drafted from my account over the past 10 years. Behind it sat lease statements for the crossover. Every payment marked successful until the one blocked after I changed the authorization. After that came summary pages from my health plan listing dependents and premiums, invoices from the after-school program, and phone bills for the family plan, each device labeled with a name. No one picked anything up. Maureen stared at the columns. Philip stared at the dates. Desiree stared only at the lease line where the most recent charge had failed. "This is what I have been doing," I said. "Not one favor. Not once in a while. For years." Philip's gaze moved slowly down the page. He asked why I had never told them the total, why I had kept them in the dark if it was so heavy. It was the first time he acknowledged that there was a total at all. Maureen's expression folded in on itself as she saw how far back the statements went. She began to say she would have helped if she had understood, then stopped as the words met the evidence in front of her. Desiree did not look away from the car statements. She said that if I cared about Alana, I would fix that line first and they could figure the rest out later. Her focus was exactly where it had always been, on the thing that made her look successful. Alana had been quiet, bent over a kid's menu with a stub of crayon. At the sound of her name, she glanced up, eyes moving from the folder to her mother, and then to me. "I thought you liked paying for stuff," she said, in the flat tone children use when they repeat a fact. "Mom says you always will, because you do not really have your own family." The air around the table changed. Desiree went still. Maureen's hand rose to her mouth. Philip looked at the girl like she had just read out a verdict. I kept my attention on Desiree. "Then that," I said, "is why the payment stopped." I closed the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stepped out of the booth. No one moved to follow as I walked past the counter and out into the winter light. 2 days after the diner, the first real answers arrived in other people's envelopes. Bank logos lined the corners of white paper. My parents' names appeared as borrowers, my sister's as customer, and my own on the line for the account that had been feeding their balances. The system was finally addressing them instead of treating me as the only adult in the room. The house loan notice was blunt. A scheduled draft had failed. A fee would be added if no transfer arrived during the grace window, and if the account slipped further, the lender would contact the borrowers to discuss options. I had seen that language years ago when I agreed to help. What changed was my willingness to let those sentences land where they belonged. My phone reacted before they did. Desiree's texts landed in a rush, long strings of accusations and demands. She wrote that I was trying to wreck her life over one bad moment, that she needed the car for Alana, that I had ruined everything with the loan, the plan, the club. Every solution in her mind looked the same. I would call, fix it, and apologize. Maureen's messages were slower but thicker. She talked about how close she and Philip had come to losing the row house, how she had finally slept when she thought the loan was stable, how she did not recognize the daughter who could watch her parents slide backward. Underneath all of it sat one belief: a good child would step back into the fire. Philip wrote the least. His messages were blunt, focused on duty and pride. Adults honored agreements. I had signed my name, so I was responsible. Backing out now was selfish. He did not mention that every signature had come after a disaster he and Maureen could not unwind alone. I refused to mirror their tone. When they said I was destroying their credit, I answered that I had spent more than a decade protecting it and that it was their turn to speak with their lenders. When they warned that collectors would come after me, I replied that I was keeping copies of every transfer, notice, and statement, enough to show anyone exactly who had been carrying whom. During business hours, I followed the list Roderick had helped me build. I called my bank and sat through holds and transfers until I reached someone who could put stop payments on drafts tied to family accounts. I requested written confirmation for each one and stored the files beside the statements already on my laptop. The stack of documents grew fast. Next, I contacted the lease company. I told the representative that while my name sat on the contract, the vehicle lived with my sister, and that future arrangements needed to run through her. They noted the account and repeated the remaining term. I wrote down the time, date, and their name, and slid that paper into the same folder. For the house loan, I informed the servicer that the account they had been drafting from would no longer be used. The person on the line calmly recited the consequences of missed payments, late charges, default, the potential for heavier action. I said I understood. For once, the next choice would not be made by me. Behind those major accounts Smaller threads started to pull loose as well. The after-school program sent a friendly reminder that Alana's tuition was overdue and that her spot in the coding club would be paused if the balance stayed open. My benefits portal quietly displayed the next window when I could remove my parents as dependents and showed, in small print, that they could stay insured if they chose to pay the full premium themselves. The phone carrier confirmed that, at the end of the billing cycle, my account would shrink to a single line in my name, and every other device would need its own plan. None of these changes were dramatic on their own, but together they marked the beginning of a life where my support was no longer assumed. As the days slid past, my family's tone shifted without ever landing anywhere honest. Desiree's anger thinned as she juggled calls from lenders. Maureen moved between begging for a little more time and promising again that she would someday pay me back. Philip warned that I would regret this when I was older and needed the people I was pushing away. Most evenings, I cooked something simple, left my phone on the counter, and opened only the messages from institutions asking me to confirm the last steps in uncoupling my accounts. Each time I agreed to a change, my world narrowed by a small, precise degree, not into a void, but into a shape that finally felt like my own life. As winter thinned out, my life settled into a shape that no longer bent around other people's emergencies. The last confirmations arrived quietly. One email stated that my parents' coverage would convert if they chose to pay the full premium themselves. Another confirmed that the family phone plan was now a single line in my name. A notice from the after-school program said the account connected to my card had been closed, and that future enrollment would require a new payer. None of these messages felt dramatic. They read like receipts for choices I had already made in my head. My phone changed too. The constant stream of messages from my family thinned to a drip and then stopped altogether. A few final attempts slipped through from new numbers. A photo of the row house looking more worn than I remembered. A snapshot of a bus stop where Desiree waited with Alana. A picture of a stack of letters from lenders spread across my parents' kitchen table. I did not reply. I did not zoom in. I let each image pass through the same quiet that had followed me home from that New Year's brunch. My days became simple in a way that felt almost suspicious at first. I went to work, came home to a place where no one had a key but me, cooked what I wanted, watched whatever I liked on services I actually used. When money left my accounts, it did so for bills that matched the life in front of me. No one else's address appeared on my statements. No one else's name wrote on my credit. The folder I had shown in the diner lived in the bottom drawer of my desk now, paired with a backup drive holding the same records. I kept it not because I planned to fight anyone, but because I finally understood that protecting myself was not the same thing as attacking my family. It was simply refusing to be erased by the story they preferred to tell. Word filtered back to me in small sideways ways. A former neighbor mentioned that my parents had spoken to the bank themselves for the first time and were trying to refinance on terms that matched their actual income. Someone from Desiree's old social circle said she was driving an older sedan now, one she could manage without another person's signature. Alana had moved to the public school down the street, and, according to the same gossip, seemed to be doing perfectly well. None of it made me want to reconnect. The point had never been to teach them a lesson and then circle back once they behaved. The point was to step out of a role that had been swallowing me whole and to stay out of it, even if they finally realized what it had cost. On a cool evening, a few months later, I stood in my kitchen with the window cracked open, listening to traffic roll along the street below. The apartment smelled like roasted vegetables and soap. My phone lay on the counter, face up, free of red numbers demanding attention. For the first time I could remember, I could describe my life without starting the sentence with someone else's name. I thought about Alana's voice at the diner, repeating what she had heard at home like it was a fact. I thought about every time I had told myself that being useful was the same as being loved, that carrying the weight in silence made me strong instead of invisible. I thought about how easy it had been for my own mother to type me out of the family with one message, convinced that I would still keep paying while standing outside the door. What I finally understood is this: money does not buy love, but the way people treat your sacrifices tells you exactly how they define family. If your worth only counts when you are solving problems, then you are not a relative to them. You are a resource. Walking away from that is not cruelty, it is clarity. If anyone watching this finds themselves in the same position I was in, carrying everyone else's life while they call you trash for it, I hope my story gives you permission to look at the numbers and the behavior side by side. Ask yourself who would still claim you if your name vanished from their paperwork. Then decide what being part of a family means to you, not just what it costs. Thank you for listening all the way through. If this made you stop and think about your own boundaries, share it with someone who might need the same push, and take a moment to be gentle with yourself tonight.